Hey there, my name is Patrick Elson, and I'm going to run you through a brief tutorial on some aspects of character generation for Cold Steel Rain. Um, some of these procedures that we use in here are a little unusual. Not everybody will be used to some of the things that we do, so we thought it would be best if we did a series of tutorials over some of the main parts of it, at least some of the tougher parts. And so I guess the first thing I should explain to you, since this is the first one, is that Cold Steel Rain characters are designed on a percentile point basis. So you end up with a percentile point score in each of the 8 main stats: temperament, grace, intellect, sapience, agility, brawn, health, presence, on down the line. I'm only going to deal with these first 4 here today: temperament, grace, intellect, and sapience. And we're not going to do all of them completely. We're just going to show you how to generate the main stats in each of these. Well, once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. You can go on and do the rest yourself. In the course of character generation, you're going to end up with a character point total pool here, and those points are going to be invested into the main stats. Each main stat has several substats under it. For temperament, nerve, and mental stability are substats. For grace, leadership, persuasion, articulation are substats. Intellect has intuition, perception, and curiosity. Substats are generated after all of the main stats have been generated, and because all substats derive their point totals from the main stats that govern them. So, plus a mix of some others. So, say if you were going to generate the nerve stat here, it would receive 50% of the temperament score that it's under. Then it's also going to get 25% of the character's intellect score and 25% of the character's presence score. And I'll show you a quick and easy way to figure that out so that there's not a whole lot of like random little calculations you have to do. The character sheet's designed to help that process along. So when we get to that phase, maybe in the third tutorial or so, I'll go over that in detail. But for now, we're just worried about the main stats. As long as you get that part down, everything else is going to fall into line here. Before you can determine the character point pool, there's a couple of modifiers that you need to do. So the very first step to making a character for Cold Steel Rain is to go over here and figure out 2 aspects of the character. The first one is going to be what we call a stat minimum, be this score right here, and the other one's going to be what we call an initial placement limit, which would be covered in this little box here. The stat minimums are, I guess you can think of them as the character's sort of genetic predisposition. These are going to be free points. You're going to roll on a chart, and that chart's going to determine the amount of points that are the absolute minimum amount of points that each one of the main stats are going to have in it. These points are free, and they don't come from the character point pool like the advancement point pool that you'll be spending later. These are just free points that get added in right away. So if you roll good here, you can end up with a lot of points in your character way before you ever go to the character point totals. To generate your stat minimums, what you need to do is go to a chart on page 118 of the Cold Steel Rain Player's Guide, and you roll percentile dice on that chart to come up with the list of numbers, and you're just going to go right down the line. You roll on the chart, the lower score is better, and the chart tells you not only the point total you get depending on what score you've rolled, but if there's a chance for any quirks or boons that the character might have in the main stats where you're rolling for these. If your character is going to have quirks or boons, they're most likely going to come up at this time while you're rolling for stat minimums. Now I've gone ahead and rolled them already, so I'll just list them here. In the process of doing this, I rolled a 90 on temperament, which gave me 0 points, which isn't that great, but could have been worse. The grace, I rolled 21, which gave me 15 points minimum. And intellect, I rolled a 98, which is a terrible roll, and that gave this character a -5 intellect. -5 here means that in this particular case, this character starts out in the hole, character point wise. He's going to have to spend 5 points from his character pool just to bring his intellect to 0. So this is kind of a detriment to have. And because it's also a pretty bad score to have rolled, he's going to have a automatic quirk in intellect. So we're going to want to mark this over here. We'll keep going down the list and doing our stat minimums, and then at the end we'll come back and try to determine what the intellect quirk is that this character has. The GM can go to the GM's guide and roll for that there, or The player can do that or whatever. On Sapience, I rolled an 11, and that gave him a 20-point minimum. Now, that's a very good stat minimum, and this character is going to have a 15% chance of getting a boon in Sapience. Quirks and boons are just sort of like permanent adjustments to the character. A quirk is like a permanent limp or hindrance, and a boon is like something special that the character always has about him. He just happens to be really good at Sapience for some reason, so he gets a little bonus in some particular situation or area. So, I highlighted over here that I marked these. I marked an exclamation point to mean that he's got an automatic quirk here. And in Sapience, the asterisk just means he has a 15% chance of it. So when I'm all done with stat minimums, I'd come back, roll that percentage chance. If I didn't get it, just erase it, go and check on the chart where I need to get this this quirk taken care of. Now once you get through your stat minimums, you shoot back over here, and you begin to do the IPLs, and I've highlighted them in green. What an IPL is stands for initial point limit, and this is sort of a ceiling, an arbitrary ceiling that gets attached to each of the main stats, and applies only during character generation. This ceiling, and that would be the limit of points that you could put into this character's main faculties during character generation. You're going to generate these just by rolling random percentages for each one. So take 2 die 10, roll a percentage for each one of the scores all the way down. I've done that already. Got a 75 for temperament. That's a huge ceiling. It means you're probably not even going to fill that up. For grace, I rolled a 47. That's average. You might get to 47 if you want your character to have a high grace and you had enough points in your point pool here to do it with. The 23 intellect, given that he's got a -5 already, is pretty low. This character is obviously starting with a pretty serious limp in his intellect. And Sapience, I rolled a 30. He's got a 20 minimum. That means that it's only going to cost the player 10 points out of the pool to put it to the limit of what it can be at character generation. So that'd be well worth it. And he's going to have a strong Sapience. He starts out kind of jumped ahead in Sapience. Now the reason that we do these things, the stat minimums, like I said, give us some of a story basis. They give us maybe a genetic predisposition. We know, for instance, this character has something wrong with his intellect, so maybe he was kicked by a mule, or I don't know, his parents were taney, or he's taney, or he got sick as a child or something. Because these scores have kind of generated this limp in the character in terms of intellect, the game master and the player can get together and try to figure out how they want to explain this. This gives us sort of a budding story basis for the character's history and what it faces. Also, the player also knows he's going to have a limp in this particular stat right from the beginning. He's not going to be able to put points in to make it more than a 23, and so that's always going to be a little low. The initial placement limit, its function is more of a sort of a random modification, and it also works to help keep min-maxing down. I don't know if your play group is anything like mine, but I've got about 3 players that you leave them alone with the rule book for about 20 minutes and they'll figure out 19 loopholes to get the best stats possible in any possible situation. So I put in this random modification that comes in just to lay an arbitrary ceiling on some of these stats. The nice thing is that this gives us kind of a story situation when it happens, right? Now the last thing I want to mention about you go down, of course, through all of the main stats and do this. And the last thing I want to mention about is that there's some complications. These are gone over in depth on page 119 of the player's guide. But just off the cuff, I want to mention that one of the weird ones that can happen is sort of a reversal. Say that you had rolled a stat minimum of, say, 20 points in grace, but you had rolled the initial placement limit as a 15. Well, that would seem to say you can't have more than 15 in the stat, but you have 20 point stat minimum. In that case, the minimum always stands. So the stat minimum is the least amount that the character can have, no matter what the initial placement limit is. A couple other complications, you can look over those in the GM's guide. So anyway, this is the first step to making your character. You get that done and you're well on your way. So check back for the next tutorial. If you're having any troubles with any of this, you can feel free to email me and let me know how you think this went, and if I missed anything, I'll try to catch it later. Alright, thanks.